Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Ruvain speaking to you from Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 15th day of the month of Iyar 5781. It is April 27th, 2021. Today is 30 days, which are 4 weeks and 2 days of the Omer. We are still counting the Omer up to day 30 of 49. Coming up soon, Lag BaOmer, the 33rd night of the counting of the Omer, coming up this Thursday evening. And maybe we'll have time to talk about that a little later. In the meantime, this coming Shabbat, we are reading Parashat Emor, Leviticus 21:1 to 24:23. It is the third to last Parsha reading of the book of Leviticus. And as you read it, I think you sort of get the feeling that the people are being prepared for entering into the land of Israel, because they were about to, according to the original plan. They had built the Mishkan, the tabernacle. They began to move forth, and within a year, they should have been in the land. And of course, what's going to happen, spoiler alert, what's going to happen is the sin of the spies. But in the meantime, at this point in their history, they were anticipating entering into the land of Israel very soon. Before we talk more about Parshat Emor, I want to mention that today, the 15th day of Iyar, was the day that the children of Israel, having just left Egypt and having just crossed the Sea of Reeds, looked into their rucksacks, their gunny sacks. They looked in, they turned them upside down, they shook them out. No more matzah. The matzah supply that they had baked, al pi Hashem, that God told him to prepare before leaving from Egypt, just ran out. The supply lasted for 2 weeks. And so they're hungry. So they call out to Moshe and they complain. And they say, we should have died in Egypt. We had lots of food there. We never should have left. And so then God intervenes and says he's got a solution. The solution, of course, the long-term solution is the manna from heaven that was going to appear the next morning when people woke up. So it actually is going to appear on the morning of the 16th of Iyar, but the idea, the announcement of the manna was on the 15th. And with that announcement came responsibility. There's no free lunch. There wasn't one in Egypt. Remember? You worked for that one. And you're going to work for this also. You have to be steadfast. You have to be steady. You have to be consistent. You have to be persistent. You have to be on time. You got to get up in the morning. You got to gather this before the sun comes out and melts it, because that's what would happen. You can't gather more than you need, because it'll just rot. And whenever you gather, it's what you're going to need. That's discipline. And that affects all of our characters. So Israel's being taught a lesson here, and then they are told on the 6th day of the week, a double portion will fall. And you'll gather that double portion, and it won't rot the next morning. So you can't hoard it. It will last, because the next day is Shabbat. And so this manna, which in itself is this miraculous thing, all of a sudden becomes miraculous again on a different level, and that it will stay fresh for 2 days, so that the Jews can learn to honor the Shabbat, that you don't work on Shabbat, you don't prepare food on Shabbat. This is the first mitzvah of how to keep the Shabbat. The first mitzvah that's discussed, I believe. So Israel complained, God responded, and there's a relationship now. There's a relationship. And there's an honor and a respect and a trust. And it's just the beginning. Now it occurs to me when we read, I think, when we read about the Parashat of the Manna, the story of the Manna, right? And the people said, Manhu, which translates as, what is this? So they called it Manna. They complained. And I think that when we read it these days, with hindsight, we know what's going to happen, and we know all this whole story so far. So I think we're kind of critical, like, why are they complaining? They just got out of Egypt. They just crossed the Sea of Reeds, like miracle, miracle, miracle. How can you complain now? Don't you know that everything's going to be okay? Well, so you could say that they're arrogant, they're headstrong. They just got out of Egypt and they're ready to go. Or you could see it that they're maybe even a little shell-shocked still from all that's happened. Maybe they're bewildered. They don't know where they're heading to really, or what's in store. So they're a little concerned, and they're being responsible actually by saying, hey, we need food. So this is, they crossed the Sea of Reeds. We always refer to that as the birth of Israel. And the Sea of Reeds, is like the birth canal. And the water, the symbolism is very, very beautiful, very appropriate. But here, just days later, all of a sudden they run out of food. This is like when the doctor smacks the baby on the rear end. That's all of a sudden the baby cries, wait a minute, I need something. So this was the slap in the butt, maybe, pardon my expression. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but this was a wake-up call for Israel, and Israel woke up. So it's an important day. It's nice to be noted. This is the 15th, again, the day that God announced that the man would be appearing. And it lasted throughout the 40 years in the desert and did not stop appearing each morning until Israel entered into the land of Israel. From that point on, guys, it's up a notch. You got to be more responsible. Now you're going to do the work based on the lessons you learned from the manna, based on that discipline and that persistence and that consistency and that being on time and that being there when you need to and taking what you need and leaving what you don't need, economizing. All that you learned, you can put to good use here in the land of Israel. And the fact is that every Friday night, Erev Shabbat evening, after we make Kiddush, after we sanctify the Shabbat with wine, then we wash our hands and we make a motzi. We take 2 loaves of chalot. Chalot are loaves of bread with which challah was taken. Challah is the truma, the donation, the offering of the dough made to the Kohen, to the priesthood. And so we have our 2 chalot. And why do we have 2 chalot? These 2 loaves of bread to represent the double portion of the manna that fell every Friday during the 40 years of our wanderings in the desert. And I say our wanderings in the desert because when you honor that every Friday evening and Shabbat morning and on the third meal, you open your meal always with 2 chalot, to honor the miracle of the manna, and the miracle of the double portion of the man that fell every Friday. So when you're that close to it, you were there. When you mention it and honor it every Shabbat, you're very close to it. Okay, before we continue and talk a bit about Parashat Emor, and even before Parashat Emor, there's something I want to go back, talk about from Acharei Mot Kedoshim from last week. I just want to mention there's a lot of turmoil in Israel right now. It's the month of Ramadan, and traditionally, unfortunately, here in Israel, the month of Ramadan often means a lot of violence, a lot of Arab violence, Muslim violence, and it's happening this year in Jerusalem and other places, rioting, and it began with this whole TikTok, the social media app. Arab kids were sneak attacking Jews and hitting them and kicking them and knocking them down and videoing it and TikToking it, and it got very popular. And then there was a Jewish response. So now there's a lot of riots. And there's a lot of missiles coming in from Gaza because they want to jump on the bandwagon. And there's a lot of unease across the Middle East now. And I have to say, it's coming from and it's being caused by the Biden administration. The Biden presidency has, not only is it not going to bring peace, it already has disturbed the peace. It already has its first ripples of results, because the enemies of Israel are testing now. For 4 years, they stayed quiet because Israel was getting unambiguous support from the United States. Now Israel's getting an unambiguous lack of support from the United States, who is willy-nilly pursuing this nuclear agreement with Iran. I don't want to go on about it. You know the story. But I just want to say that it's not only leading to war, but it's already, the fires are already being turned up. It's not a good thing what they're doing. It's not a good thing what they're pursuing. And they're trying to make a deal with the devil. And, it's unfortunate. I'm going to turn now. I want to say, last week we talked a lot about the double portion of last week, which was Acharei Mot Kedoshim, and we talked a lot, I think, about the idea of being kadosh, of being holy, because God's holy. What does that mean? How do you do that? There's another statement that kept repeating itself in last week's parsha, dealing with many different commandments, many of them between man and fellow man, ben adam lachavero, we say, between civil law mitzvot, let's say. And oftentimes it's stated, and then we hear, Ani Hashem, I am Hashem, I am the Lord. It's sort of the second half of a commandment. For example, let's just look at this from Leviticus 19:18. You shall neither take revenge from nor bear a grudge against the members of your people. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Hashem. Okay. I am the Lord. There's actually 3 parts to this commandment. You shall never take revenge from nor bear a grudge against the members of your people. And then there's a second, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then a third part, I am Hashem, I am the Lord. I'm going to deal right now with part 2 and 3. Love your neighbor as yourself. Ahavta l'reacha kamocha. 3 words in Hebrew. Ahavta l'reacha kamocha. 3 words. In English, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Hashem. So, okay, what does that mean? How do I love my neighbor? How do you mitzvot, our commandments are all translated into things that we do, things that we occupy ourselves with, preoccupy our thoughts and our bodies with. They're all things that we do. We speak and we do them. So how do you translate something like love your neighbor as yourself? So you translate it by doing all those mitzvot, those actual things that you can do, that are good things, and they're considerate of your neighbor. There's many ways to, many commandments in which we, if you see your neighbor's donkey being burdened by a heavy load, you can lighten the load. You should lighten the load, etc., etc. But it says, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, how do you love yourself? That's the question. What does it mean? And it means you have to love yourself to love your neighbor. That's one thing. And it means that if you're having trouble loving your neighbor, then you have to work on loving yourself. But the next part, I am Hashem, is the reminder. Well, Hashem created me. Hashem created me the way I am because He wanted me the way I am. That may mean that I have to letaken, I have to overcome some weaknesses, but that's the way God made me. That's my challenge. That's my purpose. That's what I need to do. And when I accept my own importance and respect that I am an expression of God's will, and I know that everybody's created that way, then of course I can love my neighbor as myself, because we share God. We're both created in God's image. So that expression, I am Hashem, is integral to the mitzvah itself. It's the solution. The first half of that verse, you shall neither take revenge from nor bear a grudge against the members of your people. Basically, you have to work together as a people. You have to be united. You can disagree, you can have arguments, but you got to stay united. You can't bear a grudge. And God forbid, never take revenge. And why is that? Why should I have so much confidence, so much trust, so much faith in my fellow man, members of my tribe, members of my nation? Oh, because I am Hashem. I created you. So respect that. Respect one another. So this expression, I am Hashem, even the verse before, it says, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. This is interesting. It's almost like the negative of you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your fellow, but you shall not bear a sin on his account. And again, when you have to ask the question, why would I want to, why? Why should I honor my neighbor in such a way? Because the answer is, I am Hashem. If you add I am Hashem to every question in life, then you're kind of reminded that God is very near. And keep things in perspective. We're all very precious. And when we begin to realize that, things can get a lot better in the world, I think. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say about last week's Parsha, just because I felt it was an important thing to talk about. We have some time left. This week's Parsha is Parashat Emor. Begins in Leviticus chapter 21, verse 1. I'll start in Hebrew. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe Emor el Kohanim b'nei Aharon v'amarta alehem lenefesh lo yitama ba'amav. Hashem said to Moshe, say to the Kohanim, the priests, the sons of Aaron, and tell them, each of you shall not contaminate himself to a dead person among his people, except for the relative who is closest to him, to his mother and to his father, to his son, to his daughter, and to his brother. This is talking about the purity, the ritual purity, the Torah that the Kohanim needed to keep. And so when someone dies, if today a Kohen does not accompany to a kever, to a grave, if there's a funeral, he will stay outside. A Kohen who attends a levaya, a funeral procession, will stand outside the area where people are buried, so that he doesn't contact tum'ah. Today it's a symbolic act because he already has tum'ah, because we don't have the ashes of the red heifer. But it's a symbolic, it's a remembering, it's keeping it close, keeping it real, keeping it alive. So when the time comes, you know what to do. So these are the laws, but for a very close relative, a direct relative, you can jeopardize your tahara, your purity, and then you have to become pure again. Anyway, goes on to talk a lot about different rules about the kuhuna, about the kohanim, who they can marry, and certain kohanim who had certain physical defects could not serve in certain places. They couldn't have served, I guess, primary functions in the temple service. For example, kohanim who were disqualified from presenting offerings, from performing offerings, would work in the chamber of the wood, which was located in the women's court in Ezrat Nashim, and they would be in charge of preparing the timber for the fires. The wood had to be obviously the proper moisture, so that the fires would burn well, and the wood cannot be wormy or buggy in any way. So they had what to do. But much of Parashat Emor, it talks about these rules concerning the Kohanim, and then it goes on to talk about all the holidays, all the Chagim, Pesach, Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, about Yom Kippur, about Rosh Hashanah. So that's why I said before, you get this feeling that the people are getting ready to enter into the land of Israel, because, it just seems like this, it's very apropos of what they're mentioning. And then, a very interesting thing happens. The whole flow of not only Parashat Emor, but I would say the last few Parshiot, the last few weeks, weekly readings, there's sort of been a certain consistent flow to it. And then we are told, after continuing and talking more about the responsibilities of the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, such a beautiful expression, Bnei Aaron, the sons of Aaron. Kohanim are the sons of Aaron. You know a Kohen today, you know who his great-great-great-great-grandfather was. It's pretty amazing. And right after, we're in chapter 24. Hold on, we're in chapter 24. And right after the last mention of Aaron, in verse 10, we read this. Now the son of an Israelite woman, and he was the son of an Egyptian man, went out among the children of Israel, and they quarreled in the camp, the son of the Israelite woman and an Israelite man. And the son of the Israelite woman pronounced the divine name and cursed. So they brought him to Moshe. His mother's name was Shlomit, the daughter of Dibri, of the tribe of Dan. They placed him in the guardhouse till his sentence would be specified to them by the word of Hashem. Then Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Take the blasphemer outside the camp, and all who heard his blasphemy shall lean their hands on his head, and the entire community shall stone him. And to the children of Israel you shall speak, any man who blasphemes his God shall bear his sin." And then the Parashat goes on to enumerate a number of like-minded type of commandments. And if a man strikes down any human being, he shall put to death, and a man and one who slays an animal shall pay for it, the value of it, for the life he took. And a man who inflicts an injury upon his fellow man, just as he did, so shall he be done. So shall be done to him, fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, etc., etc. But where's the story coming from? The story of this man his father was an Egyptian. The Midrash connects his father to the Egyptian taskmaster that was beating the Hebrew slave when young Moshe, stepped out of the palace of Pharaoh for the first time, looked around, and saw his brethren enslaved and getting beaten. So he looked this way, that, saw no man, and slew the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. Okay. Midrash, I believe, identifies that man as the father of this man who is the son of an Israelite woman, Shlomit, Bat Dibri, from the tribe of Dan, and this Egyptian father. So that's an interesting midrash. You can think about that. It's very interesting. In the meantime, he used the ineffable name, and in anger, there's even a midrash that says the argument was, but every tribe had its own encampment and its own degel, its own flag. And this man wanted to live among the tribe of Dan, but his father wasn't of Dan. So the tribe didn't want him living with them. So a dispute broke out, and this man used the name, the ineffable name, and blasphemized. So he's put to death. It's a very harsh punishment. The judgment came directly from Hashem. And it's carried out in such a striking way. There's tremendous responsibility here and empathy. There's not a whole system. There's not a whole system of justice, that you go through this court, that court, that court, that. Strangers, you don't know people. And justice is going to be carried out, but not by you. You have representatives, whoever it is. But here the people who heard it have to lay their hands on the man. They have to take that responsibility. They have to be totally present. And then the rest of the nation has to put this person to death. Nobody gets to walk home and feel good. And nobody gets to walk home and say, wow, I'm glad I wasn't a part of that, or I wish I was a part of that. Everybody was a part of it. So everybody had to take responsibility. There was no way out. So as serious and harsh as his punishment was, and quick, that is counterbalanced by the responsibility that every member of this society had to take. Again, this story seems almost like a preview, a sneak preview of the type of things we're going to be reading about in the book of Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, which we're going to start reading in a few weeks. This type of story crops up there a lot. It's much more a book of stories of, events that happened throughout the 40 years. Or actually, I should say most of the book actually takes place throughout the first year. But as opposed to Leviticus, which of course is primarily a book of the laws of the tabernacle, of the priesthood, of purity and impurity, and as of these later portions, a lot of civil law. Again, once we delve so deeply into the workings of the tabernacle and the responsibilities of the Kohanim, of the priests, and of the whole ceremony of Yom Kippur and atonement, then the Torah comes and brings us back into the world of how we treat one another. So we look at it now from a different eyes because we've just been through this intense period of learning about temple things, about the concept of kadosh, of holiness, and how it comes from the tabernacle, from the Mishkan, from Hashem's presence, and then attaches itself to us, or we can attach ourselves to it, and it can spread out and grow in intensity. And if we can deal with one another in a civil way, with honor, with respect, with love, because we're all created in God's image, then you can really share that holiness. So I think that's why Torah is now returning with these laws. And again, it's also because getting ready to go into the land, we have one last review of all the holidays and one last review of, your basic nuts and bolts concerning how to treat one another. Because very soon people were going to be entering into the land of Israel. And the next two parshiot also, in very different ways, also deal with the preparations for entering into the land. And again, when we try to understand where Israel, the nation, was at, what were they thinking? How come they responded this way? Why was their reaction like this? We have to bear in mind that they were going through this just like we are, but they had to learn on the job training. They had to learn to be a people. And they didn't succeed in 1 year. We know that because at the crucial moment, they opted out. It took 39 more years of working on this people, and it's taken thousands of more years to burnish us, to give us a little bit of a polish, maybe. We're still working on it. We're still working on being a people. So just as we relate current events to things happening in the Torah, how do we react to current events? Well, we have the perspective that they didn't have. But we've got so much more to learn. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.